There was a yellow legal pad on my kitchen table with 31 years of my marriage divided into 3 columns, and my son was adding the figures at the bottom when I walked in from the garage with the groceries. He didn't hear the door. So I stood there a moment, a bag of oranges in each hand, and read my own life upside down. The lake house in one column, the brokerage account in another, and in the third, the smallest, the word house, and beside it, in my daughter-in-law's tidy hand, a note that said, Mom, life estate manageable. I'm Maren Whitlock. I'm 71 years old. We had buried Walter 7 days before, and I had not yet given away his reading glasses, and my children were at my table dividing the estate, as though the funeral had been a closing, and I was a chair that came with the room. I'm going to tell you exactly what I did about it, and I'll tell you now that it was quiet, that it was finished in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning before any of them understood it had begun, and that the worst thing in this story is not the columns on that legal pad. It's the document my son filed at the courthouse in his own name, certain it was the last word. It wasn't. There was a later one. Welcome back to decades of patience, where the woman they send to the kitchen turns out to be the one holding the keys to the whole house, and if anyone has ever decided, over your own table, exactly what your grief was worth, this one is for you. Stay with me, because the card in this story lands once, on a single page, and you'll know the moment it does. You're back early, Gordon said, and capped the pen and turned the legal pad face down. Too late, and too slow, and he knew it. Sloan and I were trying to get our arms around everything. For you, so you don't have to, so I don't have to. 3 words doing the work of a robbery. Aren't you good to me? I said, and set the oranges on the counter, and I made the second decision of my widowhood right there, before I'd taken off my coat. The first decision had been to bury my husband in the gray suit, not the navy. The second was this: I would be exactly the woman they had decided I was. The one who didn't understand this stuff. The one who'd sign whatever they decided. Because a person who thinks she's been caught gets careful, and a careful person hides the next page. But a person who's certain you're harmless will hand you the whole plan, line by line, and never once notice you reading it. I have read a great many plans. I should tell you that part now, because it's the hinge the whole thing turns on, and I won't waste your time pretending I was helpless. For 38 years, I was a probate and estate paralegal at Halloran and Crane, downtown, the firm that buried half this county's money for it. I did not answer phones. I drafted the wills the attorneys signed off on. I shepherded the estates through the probate court on the 4th floor of the Dell County Courthouse. The petitions, the letters testamentary, the inventories, the notices to creditors. I sat with widows on the worst week of their lives and walked them through the difference between what a family feels it owns and what the law says it owns. And I learned the one thing that is true about every estate in America, and I'll give it to you now because you're going to need it. A will in a drawer is not power. A will in a drawer is paper. The power is the last valid will admitted by the court and the person the court appoints to carry it out. Everything before that is a feeling, and feelings do not get admitted to probate. My children had never once, in 7 days of planning, considered that the grieving mother they were steering toward a life estate had spent 38 years doing precisely one thing for a living. Knowing which document actually controls, and being right when the whole family is sure. Hold on to that. We'll need it more than once. Sloan came in from the dining room, with her laptop open against her forearm like a waitress carrying a tray, and her smile arrived a half-second before she did. Maren, we didn't mean to ambush you. Sit, let me get you tea. My own kitchen, and she was getting me tea in it. We just figured, the sooner we sort the structure, the less it weighs on you. Grief brain is real. You shouldn't have to think about any of this. Grief brain. There it was, the 7th day, already, laying the first plank of the floor they'd build under me. Mom isn't thinking clearly. Mom shouldn't be deciding things. I filed it away. I have a very good drawer for things like that. I'd love some tea, I said, and I sat down at my own table and let my daughter-in-law serve me in it. Because the surgeon does not announce the incision, and I had a great deal of cutting still to plan. Let me tell you who was at that table, because if I make Sloane the whole villain, I'll have told you a comfortable lie, and I have no use for lies. Gordon is 46. He has his father's shoulders and none of his father's stillness. He is a man who has spent his adult life one good year away from being fine, and the year keeps not coming, and somewhere in the long wait he learned to mistake what he intends for what he's owed. Sloane, his wife, sells mortgages, and she believes the way some people believe in weather, that every object on earth has a number stapled to it, and the number is the truth of the thing. And Paige, my daughter, 43, who sat at the far end with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from and said almost nothing. Paige is not grasping. Paige is tired. Paige married a quiet accountant named Doug and had my granddaughter Nora and spends every ounce she has keeping a small life upright, and she had decided, I think, that going along was the same as keeping the peace. It is not. But that's a thing you learn late, or you learn it from your mother, and I was about to teach her. None of them woke up one morning and chose to rob me. They arrived at it slowly, crossed 7 days of reasonable conversations, each one softer than a robbery and harder to refuse, until the legal pad simply existed and felt like something that had always been true. I drank my tea, and then Gordon turned the pad back over, because Sloane gave him a look that said go on, and he walked me through it. It was very gentle. That's the part people never believe. There was no shouting. There was a son saying, Dad would have wanted things simple, and a daughter-in-law saying, we want to protect you from the stress, and a plan, laid out in 3 columns, that went like this. The lake house, Walter's family cabin on Lake Tamarack, where he taught both children to fish and where we'd spent 30 summers, would go to Gordon, because he's the one who uses it, and someone has to maintain it. The brokerage account, the one Walter and I had built one careful deposit at a time, would be split between the kids now, while it can do the most good. And the house, this house, paid off, where I'd raised them, would stay with me. As a life estate. Which Sloane explained to me, slowly, the way you explain a thermostat to someone elderly, means I get to live here until I die, and then it goes to the children, and isn't that lovely, Marin? You keep your home and everyone's taken care of. A life estate, in my own house, granted to me, generously by my children, out of an estate that was not theirs to grant. And there's a form, Sloane said, and slid a single page across the table to me. Already printed, already tabbed with a little pink sign here arrow. That just makes Gordon the executor, so he can handle all the court parts. So you don't have to deal with any of it. It's totally standard. You don't even have to read it. You don't even have to read it. I have heard that sentence in 100 kitchens, always from the person who most needs you not to. I picked up the page. It was a renunciation, a waiver of my right to serve as personal representative of Walter's estate, and my nomination of Gordon in my place. They'd had it drawn up already. Within 7 days of the funeral, before the casseroles were gone, my son had a lawyer and a form and a pink arrow, and all that remained was an old woman's signature on a line she'd been told not to read. You think of everything I said. We try, Sloane said, and relaxed visibly the whole length of her and filed me back underhandled, and that relaxation was the first thread I pulled. Just one little thing. Idle. An old woman's stray thought, reaching for her tea. Where did you find Dad's will? I want to be sure I'm signing the right form against the right one. And Gordon said the sentence that told me everything. It was in the file drawer in his office. The blue folder. We've got it. It's the one you two did. The one that leaves it just like this. Don't worry, Mom, it's all consistent. The blue folder. The one in the drawer. The one we did. He meant 2014. I knew, the instant he said, leaves it just like this, exactly which will my son was holding, because the will in the blue folder did leave it almost exactly like this. And there was a reason it did, and there was a reason it was no longer the will that controlled a single dollar of his father's estate. But Gordon didn't know that. Sloane didn't know that. They had found a will, and it said what they wanted, and so they had stopped. They never asked the only question that matters about any will, the question I asked strangers for 38 years. Is this the last one? There was a later one. I knew where it was. I had helped sign it. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I promised I wouldn't dump it all at once. I'll look it over, I said, and set the renunciation gently beside my saucer, unsigned. I just don't like to sign anything the week of a funeral. Your father always said, never sign grieving. Give me a few days. Of course, Sloane said, and I watched a flicker of something cross her face. Not suspicion. She didn't have the imagination for suspicion of me, but impatience, the impatience of a woman whose spreadsheet had a date on it. No rush at all. Whenever you're ready. There was a rush. I'd find out how much of one soon enough. They left at 4. Paige hugged me at the door and held on a half-second longer than the others, and almost said something and didn't. Gordon kissed my cheek and told me to rest. Sloane took her laptop and her tray-carrying smile, and at the curb I watched her say something to Gordon that made him glance back at the house, at me in the doorway, and I lifted my hand and waved, the harmless wave of a woman glad to be looked after, and they drove away believing the hardest part was behind them. Then I went back inside, and I did not call anyone, and I want you to notice that, because it matters later. A frightened woman calls. A furious woman calls. I poured the cold tea down the sink, and I went and got the box. I'll tell you about the box, because it's the thing this story turns on. It's a cedar box, about the size of a loaf of bread, that Walter gave me on our first anniversaries, because he couldn't afford the ring he wanted, and he was the kind of man who'd rather give you something true than something expensive. Dovetailed corners, a small brass hook, the smell of cedar that never once faded in 50 years. It lived on the top shelf of our closet and held the things that mattered, our marriage license, the children's birth bracelets, a curl of Gordon's baby hair, and, folded in the bottom in a manila sleeve gone soft as cloth, the papers. Walter and I cared most about keeping. Walter called it the box where the truth lives. He meant the photographs. I always meant the documents. We were both right, and the day I'm telling you about, so was he in a way I hadn't known. I sat at the oak table with the box and I took out the manila sleeve, and inside it, where I had put it myself, was a certified copy of a will dated the 9th of March, 2021, executed at the offices of Brandt and Reyes, witnessed and notarized, and on its first page, in the plain, unmissable language I had typed 10,000 times in my working life, a sentence that ended my children's plan before they'd finished drawing it. I revoke all prior wills and codicils. I sat with it a long while, not because I'd forgotten it was there. I had put it there with my own hands 2 years before, the spring after Walter's first bad scan. I sat with it because I understood, holding it, that the next 2 weeks were going to be the hardest careful thing I'd ever done, and that I was going to do them alone, the way I'd done everything that mattered, because the only other person who knew the whole of it was in the ground in the gray suit. I'll tell you what that 2021 will says in a moment. First, you need to understand why there were 2, because the gap between the will in the drawer and the will in the box is the entire story, and my son fell straight into it. Here is the short version, and I'll ration the rest. In 2014, Walter and I did the ordinary thing a couple does. We made simple wills, mirror wills, the kind I drafted for ordinary couples every week. When one of us died, most things to the survivor, but with the lake house earmarked for Gordon and the children named to split what was left when we were both gone, and, because Gordon was 40 then and steady-seeming and the eldest, Gordon named as the executor, the one who'd handle the court. It was reasonable. It reflected a family that in 2014 was not yet the family in this story. That will sat in the blue folder in the drawer for 7 years and did exactly what such a will does, which is nothing, until the day it suddenly mattered. Then came 2021, and in 2021, some things had changed that my son does not know I noticed. And one thing changed that he knows nothing about at all. I'll come to it. I want to do to you exactly what I did to them. I want to make you wait for the page, just a little, because a thing held back is a thing believed. What I did that first night was nothing dramatic. I made myself a real cup of tea, and I read the 2021 will start to finish the way. I've read 10,000 documents. Not for what I felt, but for what was true. And then I put it back in the cedar box, and I put the cedar box back on the shelf, and I went to bed, and I slept, because I am very good at sleeping the night before hard work. The frightened version of me, the one they were counting on, would have lain awake. I'd buried the frightened version with Walter. What was left was the closing officer, handed a file with an obvious defect and a short clock, and the defect this time was that 2 of my children believed a revoked will was the truth. And the clock was however long it took my son to drive that renunciation back to me with the pink arrow. The clock, it turned out, was 4 days. On the 4th day, Sloan called. Bright, warm, the closing voice. "Marin, just checking in, no pressure at all. Did you get a chance to look at the executor form? We'd love to get the ball rolling. There are some time-sensitive things, the accounts, the insurance, and honestly, the sooner Gordon's appointed, the sooner we can take all of it off your plate. The accounts, the insurance, off my plate. I'm still reading," I said. You know me, slow. A pause, just the length of a held breath. Of course. It's just, and I hate to even bring this up, but the lake house has some maintenance issues. Gordon's worried about over the winter, the pipes, and he was thinking it might make sense to get it listed sooner rather than later, while the market's decent, so it's not a drain on the estate. So if we could get him appointed, he could handle all that. For everyone's benefit. Listed. The lake house. While the widow was still in black, and the man who wanted to sell it wasn't the executor, wasn't the owner, wasn't anything yet but a name in a revoked will and a column on a legal pad. Whatever Gordon thinks is best, I said, in the voice of a woman who signs what she's handed. And I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen, and I understood that the polite, slow, gentle version of this, where I waited for the apology that was never coming and signed nothing and simply declined, was no longer available to me. Because they weren't going to wait. They were already moving, and a thing in motion, in probate, can be very hard to move back. So the next morning I did the first real thing. I drove to the lake. I drive perfectly well, whatever Sloane's spreadsheet implied. I drove the 40 minutes out to Tamarack and turned down the gravel road we'd turned down for 30 summers, and there, staked in the frozen grass beside Walter's dock, was a sign. Coming soon. With a brokerage name on it, Sloane's Brokerage, and a phone number, and a little photograph of the cabin in better weather. I sat in my car and I looked at that sign for a while. My son had put a coming soon sign on his father's lake house 6 days after the funeral, on a property he did not own, on behalf of an estate he was not yet authorized to touch, having signed a listing agreement. I would later confirm, in his own name as if the cabin were already his. He had done it in writing. He had signed something. Remember that. The people in these stories almost always do. They speak in front of witnesses. They post it online, they put it in writing. And then they hand you the thing that hangs them and never feel it leave their hand. I did not pull the sign up. I took a photograph of it with the date, the way a court reporter once taught a friend of mine to do. And then I drove home. And on the way I made a decision I want to tell you about plainly. Because it's the part I'm proudest of, and it's the part that took the most out of me. I decided I was not going to do this with a hammer. I could have. Understand that I could have. The 2021 will made the lake house mine, wholly mine, And a listing agreement signed by a man with no authority to sell a property he didn't own is the kind of thing that ends careers and starts lawsuits. And Sloane's license was on that brokerage sign. I could have let Gordon march into probate court with the 2014 will and his pink arrow renunciation. Let him stand before the judge on the 4th floor and ask to be appointed, and then produced the 2021 will at the worst possible moment and watched the whole thing collapse on him in public, with a lawyer's bill at the end and a stain that wouldn't wash out. I spent 38 years watching that exact catastrophe happen to people who deserved it less than my son did. I didn't want the hammer. The hammer is loud, and loud is not the brand of a woman who held her tongue through 7 days of her own dispossession. There is a power that announces itself and a power that simply, finally, acts, and I have only ever respected the second kind. So I chose the quiet thing, the surgical thing, the thing that would be over before they understood it had begun. But to do it quietly, I needed 2 things first. I needed the will made bulletproof, and I needed to make sure they couldn't do to me the thing I'd watched done to a dozen widows. Couldn't whisper grief brain and incompetent and not fit until a judge believed it. So that afternoon I made 2 appointments, one with Walter's attorney, one with my own doctor. I'll take the doctor first, because it's short and it's the wall the whole defense stands on. The word in Sloane's note had been manageable, and the word on the 4th day had been grief brain, and I knew that road because I'd driven 100 families down it. If I simply refused to sign the renunciation, if I planted my feet, the next move in the playbook is a quiet suggestion that Mother isn't competent to serve, that she's overwhelmed, confused, not herself since the funeral, and a friendly petition, and a judge who sees a capable son and a tearful mother and removes the difficulty by removing her. I would not give them the word. So I went to Dr. Halsey, who's known me 9 years, and I told her exactly what was happening, and she listened, and then she did the full cognitive evaluation, the formal one, with a score, and the score was the score of a woman 15 years younger, and she wrote a letter, signed, dated, stating she had no clinical concern whatsoever about my capacity to manage my affairs or to serve as a fiduciary, and that any representation otherwise should be treated with skepticism. I folded it into the cedar box, on top of the will. The defense and the weapon, in cedar, side by side. The attorney took longer, and it's where the card got its edge, so stay with me. Branton Reyes is on the 3rd floor of the Ackerman building, and I knew it well, because in my working years I'd sent files across town to Lena Brandt for 20 years, and she'd sent them back cleaner than she got them. Lena drew the 2021 will. She remembered me the moment I walked in, because everyone at the courthouse remembered the Halloran paralegal who never once let a defective petition through. And she cleared an hour, and then she cleared the afternoon. I put the certified copy on her desk, and I told her the whole of it. The legal pad, the 3 columns, the life estate, the renunciation with the pink arrow, the coming soon sign, the listing Gordon had signed. Lena listened the way good lawyers listen, which is without one interruption, and at the end she took off her glasses and said, "Marin, do they know this exists?" "No," I said. "They found 2014. They never asked if there was a later one." "They never asked," she repeated, and shook her head slowly, the way professionals do at the one mistake that undoes all the others. "They found a will, and it said what they wanted, so they stopped reading." She put her glasses back on. "All right. Let's make sure that when it matters, this is unarguable. And here is what we did. Over that afternoon and the days after, and I'm going to tell it to you plainly because the calm of the ending is built entirely on the boredom of this part. We confirmed that the original 2021 will, the wet ink one, the one the court actually wants, was in Lena's firm's vault, where Walter and I had left it on purpose, because I have watched too many original wills vanish from too many drawers after too many funerals. We confirmed the execution was perfect. 2 disinterested witnesses, a notary, a self-proving affidavit attached. The whole thing built to my own standards, which is to say built to be impossible to break. We confirmed the revocation clause on page 1, and then Lena prepared the petition. The petition for probate of the 2021 will and for my appointment as personal representative. Because the 2021 will named me, Maren Ruth Whitlock, sole executor and sole beneficiary, and a named executor has priority over everyone, including a son waiving an older will he found in a drawer. I want to be precise about that, because it's the whole machine. My son thought that possessing the 2014 will, plus a signature from me on a renunciation, would make him the executor. He had it exactly backwards. He didn't own anything by holding that paper. The court appoints the executor, and the court gives priority to the last valid will, and the last valid will named me, and only me. Every move he made, the renunciation, the listing, the coming soon sign, was built on a foundation that had been quietly demolished in March of 2021, and he had never once gone down to the basement to check that it was still there. There was a question I had to ask Lena before we filed, and I want you to hear her answer, because it changed the shape of what I did. I asked her whether we should file quietly and simply let them find out when the court mailed them notice. The cold way, the procedural way, the way that would have been entirely within my rights. Lena thought about it. Then she said, "You can. It's clean and it's correct." But Maren, they put it in writing. The renunciation, the listing agreement, the spreadsheet your daughter-in-law has been emailing around. If this ever turns ugly, if Gordon decides to contest, the kindest thing and the strongest thing might be the same thing. Bring them in. Read it to them yourself, with me in the room as a witness. Let them hear page 1 with their own ears, from the person who has every right to read it to them. It's harder to fight a thing you watched land. So that's what I chose. Not the cold mailing, not the courthouse ambush. A reading, in Lena's conference room, theirs to attend, mine to run. But before I tell you about the reading, I have to tell you about the spreadsheet, because that's the day it stopped being only about a house and started being about my granddaughter. Sloan had been emailing. I learned this from Nora. Nora is 13. She's Paige's, my only grandchild, and she telephones me on her own, which I treasure, usually to tell me about a book or to complain about her mother in the loyal way of girls who adore their mothers. 3 days after I saw Lena, Nora called, and she was quiet in a way 13-year-olds are not quiet, and finally she said, "Grandma, is it true you can't be in charge of Grandpa's money because you're too sad?" I held the phone and kept my voice level. "Who told you that, sweetheart?" And out it came, the way it does from a child who's overheard the grown-ups and not been told to keep it. Aunt Sloan had sent her mom a spreadsheet. The Whitlock thing, Nora called it, and there'd been a fight, a quiet one, the kind with the door closed, and Nora had heard her father, Doug, say, "It's her money, Paige." It's Maren's call. And she'd heard Sloane's voice come back through the phone on speaker, saying that you couldn't really let Maren handle the estate, that she wasn't up to it right now, that it would be a kindness to just take it off her hands, that she'll sign whatever we decide. She always does. She'll sign whatever we decide. She always does. That sentence had now been said about me twice. Once to my face, dressed as concern, and once to a 13-year-old's mother, dressed as fact. And the second time it had reached a child, and the child had been handed a small heavy thing to carry. The idea that her grandmother had been broken by grief into someone who couldn't be trusted with her own life. "Nora," I said, "I want you to remember something. Can you do that?" She said yes. "I am very sad about Grandpa. Being sad is not the same as being confused, and it is certainly not the same as being unable to count. I am perfectly able to handle Grandpa's affairs. In fact, I'm the only one Grandpa trusted to. You'll understand that part soon, all right?" She said all right, in the small, relieved voice of a child handed back something heavy, and we talked about her book, and I let her go. And then I sat in the dark a while, and that was the closest I came, the whole of it, to making the angry phone call, because they had pulled a child into it. Not out of cruelty. Sloane is not cruel. She is certain, which is worse and quieter. But they had let an explanation for their convenience reach my granddaughter, and the explanation was that I was less than I am. I have spent my life being underestimated by people who loved me carelessly, and I had made my peace with that long ago. But I would not have Nora taught it. That was the night the tenderness I still felt for my son went very still and very clear, not vengeful. There's a clarity that is colder and steadier than anger and far more useful, and I had it now. I called Lena in the morning and told her to send the notice. We set the reading for the following Tuesday, 10 o'clock, her conference room. I asked her to invite Gordon and Paige in writing, formally, to the reading of the last will and testament of Walter J. Whitlock. I knew exactly what they'd assume soon. They'd assume it was 2014. They'd assume it was the will that said what they wanted, and they'd come to hear it confirmed, and they'd bring the pink arrow renunciation in a folder, ready for my signature, the formality at the end of a thing they'd already decided. Now, the 2021 will. It's time. You've waited as patiently as I did. I told you some things changed in 2021. Here is what changed that my son half knows, and here is the thing he knows nothing about. In the spring of 2021, Walter had his first bad scan, the slow kind, the kind that gives you a few years and takes them back one at a time. And in the months after, while he was still entirely himself, two of our children began to do a thing that I think they didn't even know they were doing, which is to begin, gently, to manage us. To speak a little louder and a little slower. To use the word we about our decisions. To suggest that the lake house was a lot to keep up, and that maybe Gordon should be added to the accounts, just in case, and that we should get our affairs in order. By which they did not mean our affairs, and they did not mean our order. Walter saw it before I did. That's the thing that surprised me. My quiet husband, who let me handle the documents our whole marriage, because that was my trade, sat me down one evening at this same oak table and said, "Marin, I want to change the will. I want it to be all yours. Everything. And I want you to be the one who's in charge of it, not Gordon, not anybody. Because I've been watching, and I think when I'm gone, they're going to try to take care of you right out of your own life, and I won't be here to stop it, so I want it built so it stops itself." I argued with him a little, for the children's sake. He didn't budge. "I'm not cutting them out forever," he said. "It all comes back around to them when you're gone, the same as before. I'm just making sure that while you're alive, nobody gets to decide a single thing for you. The lake house is yours. The money is yours. The house is yours, free, not some life estate they hand you like a favor. And you're the executor, because you're the only one in this family who actually knows how, and because I'm not going to make my wife ask my son's permission to live." So in March of 2021, we drove to Lena Brandt's office, and we executed new mirror wills. Mine leaving everything to him if he went first, his leaving everything to me, and naming me sole executor, with the children to inherit only after we were both gone, exactly as before. The 2021 will didn't disinherit anyone. It simply put me, fully and solely, in charge of my own widowhood, and it revoked the 2014 will on page 1 in language I'd typed 10,000 times. We left the original in Lena's vault. We told no one, and on the way home, Walter said the thing I didn't understand until I opened the cedar box the night of the legal pad. He said, "Put your copy somewhere you'll find it when you need it. You'll know when. You'll know when." He carried that for 2 years, the knowing, and then he died, and he never told Gordon, and I understood why the moment I needed to. He knew his son. He knew the man who'd one day sit at my table with a yellow legal pad and a pink arrow and call it kindness, and he made sure that the one thing they'd come for, control of me, dressed up as control of the estate, was the one thing that had quietly stopped being available to them in the spring of 2021. He gave me the card 2 years early and trusted me to know the hour. I knew the hour. It was Tuesday at 10. Before I take you into that room, I want to ask you something, because it matters to me that you're actually here and not letting this play in another tab. Has anyone ever decided, in the worst week of your life, that your grief made you theirs to manage? Write their first name in the comments, just the first name. I read everyone, and subscribe, because the next few minutes are the ones I built this whole story to reach. I did not tell Gordon or Sloan or Paige anything. For 2 weeks I'd been the grieving mother who'd sign whatever they decided, and I stayed her right to the end because the surgeon does not announce the incision. On the Monday before, Sloan called once more, thrilled, to say that the lake house listing was getting interest already, and that they'd handle everything at the will thing tomorrow. And wasn't it all coming together? It really is, I said, and I meant every word. Then I laid out the navy dress I wear to things that matter. I have closed thousands of files, and I have a dress for it, and I put the cedar box on the dresser, and I slept. Tuesday morning I drove myself downtown to the Ackerman building and rode up to the 3rd floor with the cedar box under my arm. They were already there. Gordon in a good shirt, leaning back, comfortable, a man arriving to collect. Sloan beside him with her laptop and a folder I knew held the renunciation with the pink arrow. And Paige, at the far end again, with her hands in her lap and her eyes down, and beside her, this I hadn't expected, Doug, her quiet accountant husband, who nodded at me once, gravely, in a way I'd remember later. Lena sat at the head with a legal pad and a small recorder, she announced. She was turning on, for the record, as is standard at a reading, and Gordon waved a hand. Sure, fine. The magnanimous wave of a man who believes the record will only confirm him. I sat to Lena's right and set the cedar box on the table in front of me, closed and folded my hands on top of it. Gordon looked at the box and didn't think anything of it. Why would he? It was just an old box his mother carried things in. Before we begin, Lena said, I want to confirm everyone understands what a reading is. The court determines what's valid. But it's customary and often kind to read the operative will to the family first, so there are no surprises in the courtroom. Marin has asked to read it herself. Marin? Thank you, Lena, I said, and I opened the cedar box. I want to be honest about the room, because people imagine these moments are loud, and they almost never are. It was quiet. There was a pitcher of water no one touched, and the small hum of the recorder, and the smell of cedar reaching the table as I lifted the lid. I took out the manila sleeve, and from it the certified copy of the will, and I set the box aside, and I did not hurry, because I have learned that a thing done slowly in a quiet room cannot be argued with the way a thing done quickly in a loud one can. This is the last will and testament of Walter James Whitlock, I said. Executed the 9th of March, 2021. Witnessed and notarized. The original is in this firm's vault, where your father and I left it. I looked up at my son. Gordon, the will you found in the blue folder is the one we made in 2014. It was a good will, for the family we were in 2014. But it is not the last one. Your father and I made a new one, together, 2 years before he died. You never knew, because we never told you, and you never asked. You found a will that said what you wanted, and you stopped. I watched it begin to land. Not all at once. Gordon's face did the thing a confident man's face does when a fact arrives that he can't yet fit anywhere. A small frown, a glance at Sloan, a half-smile that didn't know whether to stay. Mom, he said, what are you talking about? We have Dad's will. You have a will, I said. Gentle. I have always believed you deliver the worst news gently. It's the only mercy left. You have a revoked will. Let me read you the first page, because the first page is the part you never reached. And I read it. I, Walter James Whitlock, a resident of Dell County, being of sound mind, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament, and I revoke all prior wills and codicils made by me. I let that sit in the room. I revoke all prior wills and codicils. 6 words doing what the legal pad and the renunciation and the coming soon sign and the spreadsheet, all of them together, could not undo. That sentence, I said, is on the first page of every properly drawn will in this country. It was on the first page of the will you found, too, Gordon. Revoking whatever came before 2014. It's how anyone in my old line of work knows, in 2 seconds, that the only will that matters is the last one. You held a document with that exact sentence on page 1, and it never once occurred to you to ask whether someone had said it again, later, about yours. Sloane had stopped typing. Her hand was flat on the closed laptop. "What does it say?" she said. "Not how dare you. Not this can't be right. What does it say?" The first honest question anyone had asked me in 2 weeks. And it was the right one, because she had finally understood she was no longer the person in the room who knew the most. "I'll tell you what it says," I said, and I turned to the dispositive page, and I read it the way I'd read 10,000 of them across my desk, in a voice that got quieter as I went. Because the climax of a thing this size should be small enough to fit in the cracks they left open. It says that your father left everything he owned to me. The lake house, the brokerage account, the house. All of it to his wife, outright and free, not in a life estate, not in trust, not subject to anyone's permission. And it says that I am the sole executor of his estate. I looked at Gordon. "Not you. There is no renunciation to sign because I am not declining to serve. I'm serving. The court will appoint me because the last valid will names me and a named executor has priority over a son holding an older one. I've filed the petition. It's done." The room was very quiet. "Now," I said. And here I want you to notice that I did not raise my voice. I lowered it. "I'm going to tell you the part that I think your father would want you to sit with, because he didn't change this will to punish you. He changed it because he watched the two of you, in 2021, begin to take care of us right out of our own decisions, and he knew that when he was gone, you'd do it to me, gently, with a legal pad, and he wouldn't be here to stop it, so he built it to stop itself. He gave me the whole of it not because he loved you less than I do. He didn't. He loved you the careless full way I love you still. But because he trusted exactly one person in this family to know the difference between taking care of someone and taking over their life. And I'm sorry to tell you it wasn't his son. It was the woman you came to my table to manage." Gordon's mouth opened and closed. And then he reached for the one thing left, the thing that always gets reached for last. "Mom, you've been under so much strain. Are you sure you understand what you're?" I slid Dr. Halsey's letter across the table. Face up, he read the first line. He stopped. "I understand it completely," I said. "I drafted documents exactly like this one for 38 years. I know what a revocation clause is, what an executor is, what priority is, and what a son is doing when he signs a listing agreement on a lake house he doesn't own 6 days after his father's funeral." And I took out the photograph of the coming soon sign, with the date on it, and laid it beside the letter, and beside that, a printed copy of the listing agreement Lena had pulled, with his signature on it. "You signed this, Gordon, as though it were yours to sell. It wasn't. It's mine. The listing is void, and I've already had it withdrawn, and I'd think very hard, if I were you and Sloane, about how that conversation goes at her brokerage. Because a licensed agent listed a property the seller had no authority to convey. And that's a real problem, professionally, and it's the kind of problem you only get when you're so sure of what you have that you never check the page underneath it." Sloane had gone pale. Not at me, at the sign, at the listing, at the brokerage logo, in the corner of a document she now understood, was a problem with her name near it. She had done it entirely to herself, in a way she'd never be able to explain to anyone, because the only honest explanation was, we never asked if there was a later will. And then I did the last thing, the thing I'd carried in the bottom of the cedar box and not mentioned, because some cards you save for after the others have all landed. There was a letter in Walter's hand. He'd written it the day we executed the 2021 will, and asked Lena to keep a copy with the original and given me one for the box, and told me to read it to the children only if it ever comes to this, and only after, so they know it came from me. I had hoped, the whole 2 weeks, that it wouldn't come to this. It had. So I unfolded it, and I read my dead husband's words into that quiet room, in his plain, unfussy voice, the voice of a man who'd rather view something true than something expensive. To my kids. If your mother is reading you this, then something happened that I was afraid would happen, and I'm sorry I'm not there to say it myself. I changed the will because I love you, and because I know you. Everything still comes to you in the end, that never changed. What changed is that while your mother is alive, she answers to no one, and decides everything, and keeps every key, and lives in her own house as the owner of it, and not the guest of it. I did not do this to take anything from you. I did it to make sure that nobody, not even people who love her, could take her own life out of her hands while telling her it was for her own good. Be better than the thing she had to protect herself from. Take care of her by asking her what she wants, and then doing that. Love, Dad. I folded the letter. Paige was crying, silently, at the end of the table, and Doug had his hand over hers. Gordon was looking at the wood of the table as though he might find something written in it. Sloane was looking at nothing. That's the will, I said. It's filed. I'm the executor. The lake house is off the market. Nothing gets divided, because there's nothing to divide. It's all mine, and it stays mine. And when I'm gone, it comes to you, exactly as it always would have. The difference being that you'll come into it as my children and not as the people who tried to take it while I was still in black. I closed the cedar box. I'm not going to shout at you. I never was. I just wanted you to hear page 1 with your own ears, from the only person in this family your father trusted to read it. People always want to scream somewhere in here. There wasn't one. The whole thing was conducted at the volume of a woman offering tea. Lena turned off the recorder. Gordon left without much to say, which is the most he's ever said to me in a hard moment. Sloane went out to the hallway to make a phone call, and I could guess to whom, and I found I could carry that more easily than I'd expected. Now, I told you the card lands once, before any grace, and it did. It landed on a Tuesday at 10, on page 1, irreversibly, before anyone said sorry. The petition was filed. I was appointed personal representative 3 weeks later. One signature, accepting the letters testamentary the court issued in my name, and with that single signature the entire estate, every dollar and deed of it, ran where Walter built it to run, to me, and through no one else's hands. I want you to hear why I'm proud of that. You do not wait for the apology to protect yourself. The apology, if it comes after you're safe, or it doesn't come at all. And a woman who makes herself safe first is not bitter. She is solvent. I made myself solvent on a Tuesday. Everything after was extra. And there was an after, the way there always is. And I'll tell you the true version, not the satisfying one, because I don't lie to make a story land. Gordon and I did not have a reconciliation scene. He was angry, and then he was quiet, and then he was a man who'd learned that his mother was not the chair that came with the room. We speak. It's careful. Sloane's brokerage had words with her about the listing, and there were some thin weeks there. And she has been a great deal more careful around me since, which is not the same as warm. And I've stopped needing it to be. I did, later, on my own terms and in my own time, help Gordon with the thing the whole scheme had really been about. There were debts under all of it, the way there usually are. But I helped him the way an owner helps, with a door I opened because it was mine to open, and not the way a managed woman helps, by signing whatever she's handed. That was the entire point, that it was mine to decide. Paige came by the house about a month after, alone, and sat at the oak table where the legal pad had been, and was quiet a long while, and then she said, I didn't stop them. I knew it wasn't right, and I told myself going along was keeping the peace. I didn't help her across it. I've learned not to. The crossing is the point. It wasn't peace, she said finally. It was just quiet. Yes, I said, because I don't soften a true thing to spare someone its weight. It was. And then I made tea, the way I would for anyone, and we drank it, and it was not fixed. And I'm not certain it gets fixed, and I've made my peace with not knowing. Some things are paid in full, and some are only ever serviced. What I know is that I didn't pretend it was settled to spare either of us the weight of it still being owed. The cedar box is back on the closet shelf. Walter's will is in the firm's vault, and a certified copy is in the box, where I'll know to find it. The renunciation with the pink arrow I kept, oddly, the way I kept one or two other things, to remember how it starts, which is not with cruelty but with certainty, with people who love you carelessly deciding, over your own table, in the worst week of your life, exactly what you're still capable of. Nora calls me on Tuesdays now. She asked me, a while ago, why Grandpa made me in charge of everything instead of splitting it up fair, and I told her the truth, which is the only thing worth spending on a grandchild. He didn't split it because fair isn't the same as safe, I said. Splitting it would have left me asking permission to live in my own life. He gave it all to me so that nobody could ever decide a single thing for me while I'm here to decide it myself. That's not greed, sweetheart. That's a man making sure his wife kept her own keys. When you're old, people will love you and try to take the keys at the same time. And they'll call it help. You let them love you. You keep the keys. She thought about that the way 13-year-olds think, frowning, filing it. I hope she keeps it. I think she will. She remembers everything. So here is what I'll leave you with. Because I didn't make this to tell you a story about me. I made it for you. Concern is a gift. But the moment someone hands you their concern with one hand and reaches for your keys with the other, your signature, your house, your husband's will, your right to decide your own days, it has stopped being concern and become an inventory. You are allowed to know the difference. You are allowed to be grieving and still be competent. You are allowed to be loved without being managed, cared for without being cleared off a balance sheet, and you are allowed. This is the permission. Take it. To protect yourself before anyone says sorry, because safety does not require an apology, and dignity does not require permission. Keep your own keys. Keep your own papers. And never sign a single page, in the worst week of your life, that someone tells you not to read. The difference between the will they found and the will that mattered, I learned across 38 years and one navy dress, lives in exactly one place. Not the drawer. Not the family. Not the way a thing has always felt. It lives on page 1. In 6 words, I revoke all prior wills. Walter said them in March of 2021. Quietly with his wife beside him, because he knew his son, and he loved him anyway, and he was not going to make me ask permission to live. My children found the will in the drawer, and they read it, and they stopped, and they never once asked the only question that decides everything. Is this the last one? It wasn't. It never was. There was a later one, and it was mine, and it had been mine all along. I'm Marin Whitlock. I probated estates for 38 years. If anyone ever decided, while you were grieving, exactly what you were still allowed to handle, tell me their first name below. And tell me, did they ever bother to ask if there was a later page? Subscribe, and stay with me, and I'll tell you another. There is always a later will. There is always a page nobody thought to turn. The estate is whoever the last valid will says it is. It always was.